Good morning, folks. Glad to see you here with us in the story behind the psalm. Good morning, Roger.
Morning, John. Good morning, everybody.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, John.
Yeah, this is a great time to start the year off with a Bible study.
That's right.
Can't beat that. Can't beat that. And we're in Psalms 57 this morning. And at the beginning of the psalm, it talks about, in the opening, as we look at that it's when David, it says, when he had fled from Saul into a cave. And Roger, I think that's 1 Samuel 22.
Yeah, 1 Samuel 22, verses 1 and 2. We've read them before, but just a quick, a reread for us, just to put us in the place where David's at. So David, in the title of the header, before the verses, is David at Adullam and Mizpah. And so starting with verse 1, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress, or in debt, or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him.
And you refer to that as David and his band of merry men.
That's right.
Because it kind of has that feel of Robin Hood and his band of merry men, kind of the group of misfits almost that gathered around David and became his warring party.
Yes.
as he fought for God in the lands around the caves of Adullam and all of Israel. So a cool story. I think it as we have talked, probably this is our 10th week of doing the story behind the psalm, and I think probably 5 or 6, just in my head, 5 or 6 of the psalms we've looked at in this past 10 weeks have been kind of right around this event. David running from Saul, conversations with Jonathan, running to Gath, talking to the priest there and getting the food, and then getting the sword of Goliath, and going to Gath and being held prisoner there, and then finally being set free. And then he runs to this cave. And as I think I said several weeks ago, this is probably a land that David knew very well. Mm-hmm. He knew these caves to the point that it says when David's brothers and father heard that he was there, they went to him. They probably knew this is where David goes all the time. It's where they went to search for him. He was there. So this is a very familiar land time to David, and I think we get the sense of angst and fear and exaltation. I think this Psalm 57 this morning is just a whole mix of emotions. Mm-hmm. At one point, David is in the pits. The next moment, he's exalting. The next moment, he's in the pits.
Right.
Next moment, he's exalting, and he just kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. And so let's jump into it.
Sure. Yep.
See what it has to say. I think in verse 1 of Psalms 57, let me just go ahead and read the first 3 verses, and we'll kind of take it in sections. Have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy on me, for in you my soul takes refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until disaster has passed. I cry out to the God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends his love and his faithfulness. And I think here in verse 50, in chapter 50, in Psalms 57, the same intro, the same word is used as begins in Psalm 56. If you remember, in Psalm 56, David began that psalm in a cry of, "Be merciful to me, O God, for men hotly pursue me." And here in Psalms 57, David begins literally with the same word. The translator translated it a little differently. Have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy on me. And so you just get the sense that David's freaked out.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's freaked out, and then also, he keeps mentioning refuge too. He's run to a cave. He's run to a place of refuge, and he keeps talking about God, for in you I take refuge, and he brings about this. And then also, I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings, and he's giving that analogy of the mother bird that bringing the chicks in underneath her wings, and sitting on the eggs, and that whole protectiveness. And if you've ever gotten near a mockingbird's nest in Florida, you know about their protectiveness.
Yeah.
They will.
Right, and I think you get that sense that a refuge, I mean, there were places of refuge, and obviously the caves of Adullam was one of those places, these caves where you sought protection when somebody was chasing you, whether it was a bandit or you were running from the law or
wild animals.
You're running from your wife. I mean, you take refuge. You take refuge in a cave, and there's safety. These caves were probably known by all the people, and there's safety there, and you could hide out, whether or not a person would enter the cave that was looking for you, or maybe there were so many caves it was kind of hard to picture. But I think the important thing, as Roger brings out, is you have this imagery that David is in a safe place. Mm-hmm. Saul is chasing him. Saul wants to, not just Saul, the king wants to kill him. The king wants to kill him. The king has his armies out looking for him. And David is in a safe place physically, but David is not lost in that moment. David takes it a step further and says, even though I'm in this place of safety, even though I am secure, I am safe, I, though, am taking refuge in you, God. Mm-hmm. You are the one that I am going to place my hope and my trust to protect me. I know this cave can do a lot, but ultimately, God, you have the last hands. And that imagery of that mother bird. Don't bypass the fact that here David is using I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, but you can't bypass it.
Right.
David is using a maternal illustration to describe God. Mm-hmm. That God is not always described as the Father, but here God is described with maternal aspects, and exactly as Roger said, that mother hen that protects its chicks, as Jesus even talked when he talked about Jerusalem. He said that I would gather you as a mother hen gathers her chicks, if you would allow that. Excuse me, O Jerusalem. And so he's saying, I'm going to rest in you until the disaster has passed. I think that's interesting. We have this story in 1 Samuel 22 of David running from Saul. I went back just in reading the story to 1 Samuel 20, mm-hmm. in that encounter with Jonathan, the son of Saul, David's friend, and David, where Jonathan was telling David that he's going to do his best to protect David, and that his father won't bring any harm to David. And in 1 Samuel 20, verse 3, David says an interesting line. He says, there is but one step, mm-hmm. between me and death. And I think that kind of gets the sense of where David's at here. Yeah. And I think you sense that in this psalm, that he has the feeling that once again, there's just one step between me and death. Saul is on my heels, and he's out to get me.
There's also a sense of hope, because mm-hmm. he is, I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed.
Right.
Or not until the disaster has killed me, or right. I mean, but until I'm going to take refuge mm-hmm. until it's over, and then I'm going out again.
Right, and I think you're right on, because in verse 2, he says, I cry out to the God Most High. I cry out to the God Most High, who fulfills His purpose for me. God, David has the trust, even though he's fearful, mm-hmm. even though he's got incredible angst. David is proclaiming the confidence that he has in God, that God's going to do what God wants to do. And David knows he's been anointed king. David knows he is the one to assume the throne at the appropriate time. And he knows that God is going to protect him.
Yeah.
And I think the name he calls God here, he doesn't use that personal name for God, but he calls out to the God Most High. And I think that has a lot. I think we can just unpack it a little bit here. David is proclaiming that God is the highest of all the gods. Right. Of course, everybody had their God. It's their Baals and Ashtaroths and all those other gods that all the other nations worshipped. And as they went through the conquest with Joshua, the whole point was to kill off all these other people so that they would also be killing off their gods, so that Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, would possess all of the land. And so David is just pausing here for a moment and saying, in the whole pantheon of gods, God, you are the God Most High. You are the one that's more powerful. You are above all the gods. You gave the gods all their authority.
And just so that we clarify, because some people, God's a God of vengeance. He's a God of, all these things. These tribes that the Israelites were supposed to clear out, they were one of their gods was Molech, and they had child sacrifices. And over in the Old Testament, God railed against these people because of their child sacrifices over and over. So that's the reason for God's vengeance. There was a purposeful vengeance for this.
Absolutely.
It wasn't not just because they weren't Israelites or whatever, but it was because of their evil, wicked ways, and God abhorred these sacrifices. That's why.
Great point. And David is just acknowledging that here.
Yeah.
That you are the Most High God. And not only is God in rank above all the other gods, but there's also this notion that God is high. He's on the mountain. He's up in the clouds. Not removed from us, but superior. The one that is above all gods. And so David he's saying, I don't cry out to a local God. Right. I don't cry out to the God of war or the God of the caves. I'm crying out to the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, and that God is going to fulfill his purposes for me. And if you remember back in Psalms 18, that beautiful writing when we covered several weeks ago, where David paints this beautiful picture of what happens when David prays to God and God hears the prayers of David in his throne room. You got to get a one or two sentence of that same mentality here, that when David cries out to God, that God sends from heaven and saves me. That God shows up. God is just not remaining on the mountain, but he comes down and he sends from heaven and saves me. He rebukes those who hotly pursue me. And God sends his love and his faithfulness. God not only shows up when I cry out in the midst of my angst, but God shows up, rebukes my enemies, removes my enemies, and sends his love and faithfulness in the same way that mother hen sends love and faithfulness and support to her chicks. Kind of a cool imagery.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of a cool imagery. Then in verse 4, David shifts gears again. He has this proclamation of hope and faithfulness in God and the confidence that God is going to come and hear his voice. And then he says, I'm in the midst of lions. I lie among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp as swords. Interesting imagery there that David, in the midst of this glorifying God in one breath, in the next breath, he feels again at the point of death.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had to so I had to go look it up just because I was curious. So,
yeah.
Do they still have lions in Israel today? And no, they don't. They were all extinct as of the early 20th century, and other than a zoo. They are extinct as far as the wild lions of the area. Yeah, cool. And so because David numerous times mentions the lions and the bears, and so there's the Syrian lion and these different bears that were in the area, and so so that's an aside for those of you who are
good point.
Are there still lions over there?
Well, I figured there still were some little kitty cats over there, wild cats running around over there. But interesting point. But obviously, as Roger said, in David's time, there were lions. David says, and again in that great line, as he's confronting Goliath, he says, God has saved me from the mouth of the bear, the paw of the lion. So David knows what lions are like. You have that great passage in Peter where Jesus says Satan is roaming around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And so you have this imagery that lions are around. You have Psalms 22 again, where David talks about his flesh is being ripped by the paws of wild animals. And so you get that sense that there were. And he says, and I'm lying among ravenous beasts. And then I just got to say, who are these men? Yeah. You know, the question is, who are these men who are teeth are like spears and arrows, and tongues are like sharp swords? So obviously, I mean, if you take the teeth and mouth, the teeth and tongue imagery, somebody is speaking harsh words to David. And you got to say, it really doesn't clarify, but you got to say it's one of two people. Either he's referring to Saul, and Saul's harsh words toward David to kill him, or I want to throw in there his band of merry men, because his band of merry men are at times saying, David, you need to kill Saul. They send him into the cave, in the other cave of En-Gedi, to kill Saul. That they go into he's encouraged by his men to go into the camp in later on in 1 Samuel to kill Saul. And so you kind of, it's not clear, but you wonder, somebody is speaking harsh words to David, either harsh words that are wanting David to go against the will of God and do harm to Saul, or harsh words from Saul and his supporters. Who was the man that was running along beside them, cussing at him all the time?
That wasn't Shibboleth.
Go back and look. You tell us who it was. You know the story. It was this one guy that was just running along, yelling at David. And so, however you want to say it, David feels the pain of these words. Yeah. I think that's bottom line. And he's saying, I don't like this. I'm surrounded by people that are telling me harsh things. And God, I feel like I'm surrounded by ravenous beasts and lions.
I'm sure it's all into the political environment too. He, through his, his counsel and everything, they're telling the people, David's bad. David's betrayed me. David's doing so. That's out there in the whole public too. That David is a betrayer. That he is trying to take the throne from Saul. That he is conspiring against him, and all these things. So it's out there in the public as well. And so David's got this big campaign against him, against his character.
Right. And so just look at what we have up to this point in this psalm. It starts with David's crying out to be merciful, that he is taking refuge in God because he's fearful. And then he has this glorious statement that God's in charge, God's going to take care of me, God's going to send, God's going to come and rescue me from my enemies. Then he goes back again to, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by lions and bears and sharp teeth and I don't know what. And then in verse 5, in verse 5, he goes the other, be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. I can relate to David because there are times in my life, there are times this week, let's just be honest. There have been times this past 7 days where in one moment I'm giving God praise and glory, and the next moment I feel like I'm in a cave. And the next moment I know God's going to be confident and come through for me and my family like he always does. And the next moment I'm feeling like I'm surrendered. And so I get David, and I think we all do. I think that's the truthfulness of David's heart in these Psalms. Is we can relate to that. I'm there. I got those ups and downs in my relationship with the Lord.
Absolutely. We all do.
we all do. And I think it's just kind of exciting to read and say, Dave, that's me. Yeah. I hear my voice in the inspired words of David as he cries out to God and is the ebb and flow of emotions. That's exactly where David is.
So verse 6, we get the last verse of lament. Then we start, because this psalm's really a lot about lament then praise. And so we get here's his last negative, his last lament. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. So
Gotta love that.
Exactly.
Gotta love that. That again in verse 4, the same thing, that he's surrounded by lions, and oh my God, life is terrible, and then be exalted, and then oh my gosh, they're going to try to trap me. They dug a pit, they've fallen into it, and so he's again more of that back and forth, as Roger said, that lament. Then in verse 7, it shifts gears. My heart is steadfast. You kind of get the sense that up to this point, David is on that emotional roller coaster. And excuse me, and as we ride roller coasters, we know at some point in that roller coaster ride, the brakes kick in, and you come back into the station. And I think here's the brakes have kicked in that roller coaster mentality, where David says in verse 7, my heart is steadfast. I know I may have emotions ruling my day. I may go up and down and back and forth, but when it's all said and done, my heart is steadfast, oh God. My heart is steadfast. I am solidified in my relationship with you. I am standing on the rock. I know all this craziness is swirling around me, but bottom line, I remember that you are the one that are the God Most High. You are caring for me. You have anointed me to be the future King of Israel, and that is where I am resting, because I have faith and confidence in your care. And I think that's pretty cool. My heart is steadfast. And he says, I will sing and make music. And then he goes, away 3 times. Awake my soul. Awake harp and lyre, to musical instruments that obviously David enjoyed playing. I will awaken the dawn. This understanding that in the steadfastness of his life, in the steadfastness of his relationship with the Lord, he is going to be one that proclaims God's mercies and God's grace and faithfulness in his life.
Yeah, you can almost imagine in music that this would be a crescendo moment. Awake my soul, awake harp and lyre, awaken the dawn.
Right,
and he's building.
He's building up, and it's kind of a cool imagery there that we have from him. And then in verse 9, I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the people. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. I think in verse 9 and 10, he's going to say, God, I'm going to not only proclaim you to my family, I'm not only going to proclaim you that you are God, you are the God Most High. To the Israelites, God, it is my purpose, he says, to proclaim you among all the nations. Going back to all the lands around, all the nations of the world, you are going to be proclaimed through David's experience, through David's life, through David's leadership of the people of Israel, that all the nations are to be blessed by God.
And David, once again, he knows the ancient scriptures, so he's talking too about the Abrahamic covenant and Abraham, and I will make your descendants as numerous as the sands, and so in the stars in the sky. And so David knows all this, and that Abraham is the father to the nations, and so he's saying, I'm going to proclaim you to all the nations. And as John and I were talking earlier, but Psalm 67 is a great psalm about that, and about David's proclamation to the nations. And it's actually one of the first psalms, or actually one of the first places in the Old Testament that talks about missions to the world, but not just the people of Israel, but to the world.
Absolutely. I think this passage, I'm glad that Roger brought out the missiology, the mission emphasis of David's proclamation to the nations, because that's a clarion call for us. I think in our understanding that, yes, in the midst of trying times, I can go back and forth. I can vacillate in my own understanding, but ultimately I need to be steadfast in understanding of who God is in my life, his care for me, his faithfulness, and his love for me, and then take that awareness that I have and proclaim it to everybody around me. I think it's one thing for us to say, man, God's good to me, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to worship, and I'm going to do my church thing, and I'm just going to relish in the reality of how good and steadfast God is to me.
Yeah.
if we stop there, I think we missed the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of our realization of God's goodness is then for us to tell other people that we see out there going up and down the road that God's good to them too.
Right.
And He has potentiality to be a God that shows up and rescues them from their enemies, that they can proclaim God's graces. And so David began this understanding that God is for all the nations, and I think it's a reminder for us as we enter into 2021 that we are here on this boulevard, not just to have a really cool worship services once a week, but we're here to proclaim the wonderfulness of this God, that He is God Most High, to all the people in the St. Pete region and around the world.
That's one of the things I liked about our last study too, is the think, act, be.
Right.
Think, act, be the church. Think like Jesus, act like Jesus, be like Jesus. And so we, going out, and we talked about it so many times in that book, and all the different ways that we can use our resources, our stewardship, our time, our obviously our compassion. We talk about so many different aspects of what it takes to reach other people for Christ.
Yeah, and I think that's our motivation in 2021. I would say is to communicate His grace and love to the people around us. As David said, "I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples." I'm not just going to sing to myself, David. I'm going to sing of you among the peoples. I'm going to let this harp and this lyre that I'm going to sing, that I'm going to awaken my soul. Excuse my voice. I'm going to do that among the people, so that your faithfulness. So folks can in verse 10, "For your love is great, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches beyond the skies." It's just you're all encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
The great expanse.
And then he ends. It's basically verse 11 is basically a repeat of verse 5. Again, where it's almost a word. It is a word for word repetition of verse 5, kind of like a chorus that you would sing in a song. "Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth." Not only, God, allow your name to be known in the heavens, but allow your name to be known around your creation, around the people that you have created, the people who are seeking after you. And I think what a great song to begin 2021, to say, yeah, God, it's been crazy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm hiding in a cave. Yeah, I am. Yeah. I'm hiding in a cave from those people that are trying to wreck my life. But God, the reality is you're in this cave with me. You created the cave. I may be in a cave, but I'm taking refuge in you. And then I get the imagery that in the first part of this psalm, David is in the back of the cave, hunkered down, hiding, fearful, hiding from Saul, hiding from the lions and the ravenous beasts. But the suns come up. Mm-hmm. And maybe the suns come up at the opening of the cave, and the sunrise is shining into the interior of that cave, and David walks to the mouth of the cave and stands there and proclaims that, awake, my soul, awake, harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. As the sun's rising, David is reminded once again that God's faithful, that God's taking care of him. And then he ends the psalm by exalting that you are above the heavens. Your glory will be over all the earth. As the sun rises and dissipates the darkness, David is feeling the dawn of a new day. And I just want to say, at the beginning of 2021 here, we have the dawning of the new year. I'm excited for what's ahead of us. I'm excited for the prospects. And I say, let's make this year the very best as we look and we watch and we embrace the faithfulness of God, and we remain steadfast in Him.
Amen.
Good deal?
Amen.
All right. God bless you.
God bless you.
Be wise, be safe. As we always say, put your mask on and
be the church.
Be the church. God bless you all.